Coming up on this episode, I talk about the feeling of being overwhelmed and how to manage it and just general life talk. So let's get into it. What's going on, beautiful people? This is the Perspective Chasing Podcast, and I'm your host, John. On this episode, I want to talk about feeling overwhelmed. And this is something we all go through in life, sometimes multiple times a week. But I don't think we talk about it anywhere near as much as we do. Well, we need to. Maybe it's because we feel a bit shameful about it, or like we can't cope, or whatever else. But feeling overwhelmed is perfectly natural. It happens to all of us. So it's not about not feeling overwhelmed. It's about having the tools to cope with it when you are. It's always going to come. It happens to me all the time, and it's just one of those ones where I've got to remind myself that I am overwhelmed and why and what I can do to fix it. It's not going to be an overnight switch. Trust me, it's something that I work on constantly, and I still get overwhelmed. But when I do get overwhelmed, I remind myself the situation that I'm in and lay it out as logically as possible because, to me, when you're overwhelmed, the emotional mind doesn't help. So looking at it logically, and a lot of it is perceived danger or perceived problems, things that we build up in our head that necessarily they ain't actually there, but we build them into something far bigger than they are in our minds, and we catastrophize everything to protect ourselves from the worst possible outcome, which again is fine, but you need to be aware of it. And then by doing that, by being aware that you are catastrophizing and you're preparing for the worst, you can kind of mediate your own behavior. Like, I think everybody's kind of geared themselves up for an argument, and then you've gone for it, and that person's not at all on that level. They don't want to argue, and now you're piped up on, like, ready to argue and everything else, and they're just like, yeah, hi. And now you'd have nothing to do with that rage or anger, so you end up taking it out on an inanimate object or whatever else. But it's still, you've catastrophized something in your mind. You've built it up to prepare yourself for the worst possible thing, which is conflict. And it's not come, so then you have to fizzle yourself out and bring yourself back to baseline. But that's what we all do through life. Like, we build up these problems to something big in our head, and then when it never happens, we've got all that built up frustration and anxiety and anger or whatever it is, we're holding on to that all built up with nowhere for it to go. So being aware of when you are overthinking and that, like that you are overthinking, initially will help so much in the fact of like, okay, I'm overthinking, that's causing me to be overwhelmed. Like, that's just me kind of preparing for the worst and everything else. That's okay. But is the worst going to happen? And is the worst happening now? Because that's the other big thing with feeling overwhelmed is you can feel like everything has to be now, now, now. Like, you could have a few things going on and they all have varying terms in how far away they are or their immediacy. But then finding that and realizing that, okay, not everything is happening now. What do I need to take care of in the immediate? What has got me in danger? What do I need to take care of now? Sort that out and then go from there. And even then, like, again, it comes back to that feedback loop. Once you kind of take care of one thing and you give one thing your focus and everything else fades away, that feeling of being overwhelmed kind of goes away because now you've got something to focus on. And it is a bit of a distraction, but it's a positive distraction because it's getting you to where you want to go. It's getting you to a better place. So by taking that time and going, cool, having that thought process, I'm overthinking, that's causing me to be overwhelmed. What can I work on? What is in the immediate that is causing me the most problem? sort that out, and then on to the next. And then once you've dealt with that first problem, you'll realize that it's probably not as big as you built it up to be. So then you carry that into going into the second problem. And then when you deal with that one, you start to build this positive snowball. And that will happen, and you'll get through everything, and that feeling of being overwhelmed will go away. But then it will come back. And that's the importance of reminding yourself of being in these situations. Because they're always going to come back around. That's why it's better to have the tools. That's why I always think it's better to deal with your own problems instead of letting somebody else deal with them for you. Because if you deal with it yourself, you know how to deal with it next time. If every time something goes wrong with your car, with your house, with your relationship, with your work, with whatever it is, you run to somebody else to fix it, when there's nobody to run to, how are you going to fix it? So give yourself the tools. There ain't no shortcuts to getting the tools. You have to learn the painful lessons. That's life. But if you're aware of it, if you learn these lessons and you make it part of your habit to remind yourself of them and realize when you're in them, then you'll manage yourself far better. And that's kind of what this whole game is about, no? Understanding ourselves, understanding what makes us tick, what makes us happy, and exploring life. I don't think anybody wants to live life in a box, stressing about the outside world. I think people would far rather explore the world and see it for what it is. And again, I might be wrong, but I know I don't want to live in a box. I know I don't want to be sitting there overthinking, overwhelmed of life. And I know there's stuff that I can do to mediate that and kind of make my life a little bit easier. So I do it, and I do it to the best I can. Does it mean I don't fall in the occasional pothole or trap or chasm for that matter? No, it happens. But I get back up, I dust myself off, and I go again. This time with new lessons and a different perspective. That's the name of the game. Anyway, I hope this helped with anybody kind of feeling a bit overwhelmed. And like I say, take it slow, and it will happen again. But that's fine, because next time you'll be more experienced, you'll have more tools, and you'll deal with it better. The seed for this episode is going to be to take some time to sit down and realize that your problems are your problems. And that's not to dismiss them by any means. They have every importance to your life as you feel they do. But to everybody else, to me, to the 7 billion other people around the world, they don't really resonate. They're not even blips on our radars. My problems ain't a blip on your radar. But to me, they feel like the be-all and end-all. And that contributes to being overwhelmed. But when you zoom out and you realize that it's not life and death, it's just a problem, that it can be solved and there are things that you can do, it makes it far easier to manage. And also on the flip side, if the negativity ain't a blip on people's radar, then the positivity isn't either. So that means you could have the most positive, the greatest life possible, and nobody ever witnesses it. Which is kind of beautiful, but kind of sad. Anyway, I'll leave this episode there. I'm quite exhausted and don't feel great, but hey, we get it done, and such is life. All the best, and I'll catch you on the next one.